Welcome to Community Living Out Loud, brought to you by Community Living Mississauga. I'm your host, Peter Reynolds. On this podcast, we celebrate the lives of people who have an intellectual disability and the incredible work being done to advocate for them and their families. Through conversations with experts, advocates, and people with lived experiences, we hope to inspire and educate listeners on the importance of building strong, supportive communities. Let's get loud. Service coordination. It's a crucial part of Community Living Mississauga, connecting the people they support and their families to essential supports and resources. Today, we'll explore how these services help families navigate complex systems and access the care they need. We're joined by Steve Zamolski-Shupak, Manager of Service Coordination and Administrative Services, who will shed light on how these programs work and the impact they have on our community. Steve, welcome to Community Living Out Loud.
Hi, Peter. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, I guess for our audience, people that don't know, what is service coordination and what are sort of the main functions of this support?
Absolutely. So service coordination kind of in a nutshell is a goal-oriented and family-directed service that supports people of all ages who live with a family member in Mississauga. The purpose of the service is to help guide families through the developmental sector. So our team supports families to be aware of what services are available in the community and to complete referrals to access those services. We also help to educate families on how to navigate the sector and how to advocate for their family members. So it's all about supporting families to understand the system better and know what's out there and get connected to it.
So they may have services supported by Community Living Mississauga, but of course, within Mississauga, there are other support services out there, and you help basically coordinate that system.
Exactly, that's right. So it could be Community Living Mississauga's other services and programs, but also other programs that are offered elsewhere. We have information about that as well.
Fantastic. Are there different levels of support?
Yes. So service coordination has two levels of support, which exist as sort of a flow-through model. So families are either connected to what we call active support or resource support. So active support is time-limited and goal-oriented. Families work collaboratively with the service coordinator to address specific goals. So once all of those goals have been addressed, then active support does come to an end. This might mean that the person is now connected to everything that they need, or that they've completed all the applications and they're on waiting lists and there's kind of nothing left to be done. Then at that point, rather than ending our connection with the family altogether, we've decided to keep them in a lower level of service that we call resource support. So this allows them to remain connected to Community Living Mississauga and also to easily reach out to us for support if they need it again in the future. So then resource support is a lower level of service. Families can remain connected to resource support indefinitely, so it's not time limited. As long as they're still eligible, they can remain connected. Families receiving resource support are typically in a place where they're able to manage their situation on their own. So they've learned how to navigate by this point. They've got either everything they need is already in place, or they're waiting for all the appropriate things. And all these families have one contact here at Community Living Mississauga who they can contact if they do need resources or information or support. So at the resource level, families initiate contact with us if they need anything, as opposed to in active support where there's more regular communication kind of back and forth. There's more ongoing contact. If a family connected to resource support reaches out because there's new goals or their situation has changed in some way, then there might be an option to reconnect back to the active support if necessary. So kind of two levels that flow back and forth.
That's terrific. So it's really this sort of safety net that even though you may have reached the goal that you wanted to, things change. Life, can get complicated, can get messy. And if something comes up, they can easily go back to you and don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Precisely, and that's why we chose to structure ourselves that way. The other option would be to simply kind of end our file with someone when we're done, but we thought it was sort of more kind to people to just keep them with us, and it would be easier in the future so they don't have to start from scratch, because they may be able to be back with the same person who supported them a couple of years ago who already knows their story, right?
Absolutely. I can imagine, having to start all over again and retell your story. And again, having that single point of contact, which is sort of with you throughout your entire journey, is something that's not only helpful, but sort of reassuring.
Absolutely. Yeah. And certainly families have to tell their story a lot of times already with different services that they've kind of get involved in. They probably do feel like they have to repeat themselves, but at least, if they have changed levels here, we still have their history. So, we can either it'll be the same person who supported them before, or they can at least read the notes and be kind of caught up on the history and not have to start totally from scratch.
How many people are supported by service coordination?
So service coordination kind of overall supports about 1,750 people, which includes about 400 children and teens and about 1,350 adults. Of the people we support, about 30% are currently receiving the active support, and then the remaining 70% are connected to resource support.
Can you give us some examples of the types of services that service coordination supports families with, both within Community Living Mississauga and outside?
Yeah, definitely. So service coordination, we can support families to connect with a lot of different kinds of services, kind of depending on what the person and their family are looking for, what their goals are. So it's a really broad range. Some common examples would be day supports, employment supports, life skills programs, respite services, seasonal programs, social recreational programs, transportation services, applying for direct funding, behavior services, mental health services, support through any challenges that might be occurring with the school system if people are still in school, as well as assistance in that transition period from children's services to adult services, and the transition period when someone is finishing at high school. So in all of those services, some are services that Community Living Mississauga offers itself. So for example, day supports, we would help them connect to our own day support programs, but we'd also help them explore other options if ours were not a good fit, or they, based on geography, there was a different program that would be more convenient to them or whatever. We help them kind of explore both types of options, internal or external to us. We also support families to help them get stabilized during a period of crisis. So service coordination itself is not a crisis service. However, we frequently collaborate with crisis services when people and families we are supporting find themselves in that type of situation or in need of that type of support. We will work collaboratively with crisis services because, again, we may already have a history with the family, so we can help them kind of tell their story and help figure out what can be done with a crisis service.
Can you give an example of a crisis situation?
Definitely. So, there's a lot of people that we're supporting that are struggling because of lack of funding, for example. So, if the person that we support has a lot of complex behavioral needs and challenges, and the family doesn't have enough funding to afford programs, they're sort of have them at home and they're struggling to cope. So the families may be having a hard time just kind of managing the day-to-day life of kind of dealing with behavioral concerns and not being able to afford the support that they need. So that's a pretty common type of crisis. So, it would be all about finding, are there kind of creative solutions? Are there some affordable options? And crisis services might help the family members themselves with their kind of taking care of themselves and how to cope and, how to be safe and those types of things. So we would, again, we would kind of refer out or work collaboratively with crisis workers.
I'm really struck. This is a phrase that we use often, a holistic approach that Community Living Mississauga takes to the people they serve. Because, of course, things are going to change. Crises are going to come up. And I can just imagine somebody, their child is in high school, for example, and they need day support services. So they go to you. Everything is set up. All is well. But, of course, they're going to graduate from high school. They're going to move on. They're going to need more services. They don't have to start again. They just drop from that to that second level, and then they could pop back up to the next level. it all depends on what they need and they're not put in a box.
Exactly. And that's what we try to do with our, as much as we have these kind of the two levels of service and this sort of certainly lots of processes and guidelines and things like that. We try to be as flexible and person-centered, holistic as possible. For example, I say active support is time limited. Doesn't mean we have an X number of days. It's more just sort of like we go with the flow and see how things are going, because we might finish one goal and then something new has come up. So we'll continue. We don't kind of cut people off because, again, we're trying to look at the whole picture.
What are some of the challenges that are faced by families supported by service coordination?
Definitely. So at the moment, the most common challenges kind of in a nutshell would come down to limited resources. So there's a significant lack of funding for people. There's a shortage of affordable day support programs specifically for adults with kind of higher support needs. There's a shortage of day support programs. There's limited resources for support in the school system, not enough in classroom EA support or things like that. There's also a lack of available resources to address mental health and behavioral concerns. Of course, there's also a major need for residential resources and many people waiting for a residential resource to become available. In addition, the families and people that we support have been significantly impacted by the pandemic in the same ways that everyone else has in terms of the impact on people's health, mental health, and economic issues that have come about in the last few years for people. It certainly affects them just as it does everybody else. I'm proud to say that we have a very skilled, knowledgeable, and passionate team in service coordination that does excellent work supporting families to be creative with what is available and to be sympathetic. A sympathetic ear to family that is struggling. However, unfortunately, the reality is a lot of families in the community are really struggling right now because of the kind of widespread systemic lack of resources.
I'm just wondering so for those people obviously listening, who this is something that interests them, what are the eligibility requirements to access your services?
Yeah, definitely. So everyone that we support lives in Mississauga and lives with a family member. So often it's parents, but it could be a sibling or an aunt or any kind of family member who is acting as kind of a primary caregiver. And again, only in Mississauga. For people who are ages 18 and up, the person must also be deemed eligible for services by Developmental Services Ontario. Across the board, all of Community Mississauga services, that's a guideline. And for children and teens in service coordination, so DSO has not come up for them yet, but we require some documentation that confirms that they have an intellectual or developmental disability. New referrals also need to come with a goal that service coordination could assist with. So something that we're actually able to work with them on.
So if someone has determined the family has determined that they are eligible, how do they reach out? How do they connect for more information?
Yeah, so our new referrals come from central intake mechanisms. So for adults, it's through Developmental Services Ontario. They would just call the DSO and they would ask for a service coordination referral and have a conversation about what their goals are and what they're looking for. For children and teens, there's also a central intake mechanism in Peel called Kids Pathways Peel. So again, they would call there. They would say, these are my goals. They would have to provide documentation of their disability, and then we receive referrals from both of those sources.
Terrific. I'd like to shift gears for a second and talk about administrative services. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that might be helpful to families?
Definitely. So in addition to service coordination, I also manage a team called Administrative Services, which administers special services at home and passport funding for people and families. So Admin Services kind of acts like the bank, if you will, for funding. So families submit invoices to us, and then we pay their service providers directly for them. We also help families to determine which services are and are not eligible expenses under these funding programs. So special services at home being a funding for children and teens, passport funding being a funding for adults, and kind of different families that we're administering funding for might call and say, oh, I want to purchase this. Is that something that's covered? Or, I want to access this service. Is that covered? So we would help them figure that out. Before they go and spend any money, we make sure that it's something that's eligible. Administrative services is a smaller team than service coordination, but also very skilled at processing invoices, very knowledgeable about when it comes to funding programs, about what is and is not covered. Some families find it helpful to administer their funding through us. One big factor is that because we can pay providers directly, so a lot of funding sources will require families to pay up front and then wait to be reimbursed, with some families not in a position to do that. What they come to us and instead we can just pay their workers directly and they don't have to worry about kind of having a gap in waiting for their money. In addition, for example, with passport funding, people who are accessing our day support programs or other services choose to have us administer their funding for convenience because it's already here and we can just sort of pay the program directly. They don't have to, pay and get a receipt and get reimbursed. It's all just kind of convenient to do it all in one place.
What is passport funding?
So passport funding is a direct funding source for adults. It's a provincial program for all of Ontario. It's for people who are eligible under Developmental Services Ontario, so ages 18 and up. And it pays for things like community participation, so day support programs, social recreational programs. There are some eligible kind of miscellaneous expenses like some equipment that can be purchased with passport funding. As well, some people use it to pay for a private respite worker to support them if that's sort of a better option for them, as well as overnight out-of-home respite. Anything kind of community-based or respite for caregivers can be paid for with passport. And then again, like I said, there are a few kind of miscellaneous types of expenses and equipment that are also eligible.
Terrific. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Sometimes we just roll these off and don't realize that people haven't heard of them necessarily.
Excellent. So with regards to administrative services, how can this be accessed by families?
Yeah, so anyone who is receiving special services at home funding or passport funding and lives in Mississauga is welcome to just call our office and ask for administrative services and they'll help get them connected. So it's for people who are already, approved for the funding. So often special services at home and passport, when they kind of send out an approval package to someone who's receiving it for the first time, they'll include information in there about their options to have it administered. But sometimes families maybe don't notice that or later on down the line, they've changed their mind and they would like to have us administer it, and that's fine. They would just have to call us directly and we would help them set it up.
Fantastic. I'm wondering if you could give a real world example, of a family that was struggling in one area and then came to, your department to service coordination and you were able to help them get to a certain point. Do you have a specific example you could share with us?
Yeah, definitely. So a few years ago, the kind of the first example that comes to mind, certainly there are many, but a few years ago, we received a new referral for someone who is an older gentleman who had never been connected to services before. So somehow or other, he had sort of kind of slipped through the cracks and he had never received any kind of services or funding. And he was living with his elderly mother. So they were both kind of, aging, and the person that we supported was not accessing anything, and would just kind of stay at home all day, every day. His relationship with his mother was not great because they had just been kind of alone together all the time. And their dynamic had become sort of strained over time because they had just didn't have anything going on in either of their lives. They were just sort of together all the time. So we received this referral eventually from Developmental Services Ontario, and we were starting from scratch. They'd never accessed anything. So we were able to sort of support them to make sure that he was able to receive passport funding, make sure he sort of went through that process. We supported him to find a day support program that he could go during the day that was able to come and pick him up at their apartment, take him to the program, and then bring him back to their apartment because that was one of the barriers was transportation. We were able to also, that same provider, this was a sort of an external agency that we were dealing with. That provider also offered weekend overnight respite. So we were able to start that to kind of allow this person to have some time away from home, allow his mother to have a bit of a break. And over time, we were able to heal their relationship a little bit just by giving them more space. and giving the person himself kind of more to do with his day. It also allowed him to build more skills, make some friends. Again, they were very, very isolated. And then also, while the person we supported was at his programs, his mother was able to, for herself, kind of get out more. So she was able to connect to a seniors social group. She was able to kind of make some more friends, get sort of errands done, and just sort of get a better quality of life for herself as well. And then over time, because of their ages, and they were even at its best, it wasn't the most sustainable living arrangement because of their ages. So we were able to kind of through some advocacy, able to make sure that he was considered a very high priority for residential placement. And fortunately, eventually, a group home resource opened up that he was selected for. Wasn't at Community Living Mississauga, it was in another organization, but that was a great success for us because we were able to see from start to finish. He was able to move into the home. It was a great fit. He was very happy. And his mother was very happy. The rest of his siblings were all very happy. And his mother was able to kind of move into the next phase of her life in terms of retirement community. And again, overall have just a kind of a better quality of life for both of them. So that was one situation that certainly we're very proud of.
It's a wonderful story. Absolutely wonderful. He may have fallen through the cracks early in life, but, he was able, obviously to benefit in his later years. So, and not only him, but his entire family. So what an incredible story.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Steve, any final thoughts, words to the audience that you'd like to share?
I think I would emphasize that there's a lot of challenges in the community right now, and I would encourage families that are struggling to seek support, either through service coordination, crisis services, kind of getting out there or if you prefer exploring on your own, I would encourage people to kind of put themselves out there and look. As I said, there's certainly a lot of limitations in the community and in the sector, but there are also some options out there. So I would always encourage people to look and see what's out there because you don't know what you don't know. And I would encourage those families to look for help. And I would again kind of want to acknowledge all the excellent work that service coordinators that work in my department and administrative services that work in my department do. They all work very hard. As I said, they're all very dedicated, very passionate, and just want it known that their efforts are appreciated.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. It's clear how crucial service coordination and administrative services are in supporting people who have an intellectual disability and their families to access the resources they need. It's been a great conversation. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you for doing this to kind of this podcast in general to showcase all the great work all the teams at Community Living Mississauga are doing. This has been great. Thank you.
And of course, thank you to our audience. Your continued support means everything to us. And remember, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast app, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We love to hear your thoughts. So for Steve and everyone here at Community Living Mississauga, I'm Peter Reynolds. You've been listening to Community Living Out Loud. And until next time, stay loud.